Thomas Reed adjusted his collar as he walked through the gleaming corridors of the Grand Council station. The artificial gravity felt slightly off, tuned to the comfort of species other than human, but he'd learned to adapt during his 6 months as Earth's representative to the Star Alliance. The station itself was a marvel of engineering, a massive structure hanging in space at the intersection of 7 major trade routes. Its halls were filled with beings from across the galaxy, most of whom barely spared a glance for the human in their midst. Those who did look his way often wore expressions of thinly veiled contempt, or whatever passed for contempt in their species' facial structures. Reed had grown accustomed to their attitudes. Earth was considered a primitive world by Alliance standards, having achieved faster-than-light travel mere decades ago while most member species had been crossing the stars for centuries. But Reed knew something they didn't: humanity's apparent technological gap was more about choice than capability. As he approached the council chambers, a tall, blue-skinned representative from the stellar core worlds blocked his path. "The primitive brings more demands," the alien asked, mandibles clicking in what Reed had learned was amusement. "Perhaps you should focus on mastering basic spatial navigation before attempting galactic politics." Reed smiled politely, the same measured smile that had served him through 30 years of military service before his diplomatic appointment. "Every species progresses at its own pace," he replied, stepping around the alien with practiced ease. "We're simply grateful for the opportunity to learn from our more experienced neighbors." The chamber doors slid open with a soft hiss. Inside, the circular room rose several stories high, with delegate pods arranged in ascending rings. Earth's position was near the bottom, befitting their developing species status. Reed took his seat, activating the universal translator and environmental controls built into his pod. Today's session was crucial. The Council was voting on new trade route allocations, and Earth's proposal for access to the Centauri corridor had already drawn criticism from several powerful factions. Reed had spent months building support among smaller species, knowing that the larger powers would oppose any expansion of human influence. "The Council recognizes the representative from Earth," announced the chief moderator, a crystalline being who shimmered with each word. "You may present your case." Reed stood, his presentation ready. But before he could speak, a sharp commotion erupted from the upper tiers. A group of delegates from the militant faction, an aggressive alliance of species known for their expansionist policies, had left their pods and were descending toward the chamber floor. "The primitive species forgets its place," their leader announced, holding what appeared to be a ceremonial staff. Reed's military training screamed danger, but protocol and strategy required him to hold his ground. Running would only reinforce their view of humanity as weak. "We have followed proper council procedures," Reed stated calmly, noting which species were watching with interest and which with concern. Every reaction was valuable intelligence. "If you have objections, there are appropriate channels." The staff's end suddenly glowed with plasma energy. Reed had anticipated potential violence, but not such a public display. The militant faction leader aimed the weapon directly at him. "Your species needs to learn its place in the galaxy," the alien declared. "Let this serve as a lesson to all who forget the natural order." The plasma burst struck Reed square in the chest. The pain was immediate and overwhelming, but years of training kept him from crying out. As he fell, his hand brushed the emergency beacon hidden in his jacket, not to call for help, but to send a single, prearranged signal to Earth. The last thing Reed saw before losing consciousness was the chaos erupting in the chamber. Some delegates were shouting in protest, others watching in approval, none realizing they had just witnessed not the end of human influence, but its beginning. As darkness took him, Reed's final thought was almost pitying: they had no idea what they had just started. The militant faction would learn, as would the entire Star Alliance, that humanity's greatest strength wasn't technology or military might, it was the ability to appear harmless until threatened. And now, they had done the one thing guaranteed to shatter that carefully maintained illusion. They had burned a human diplomat. The emergency signal from Reed's beacon reached Earth within minutes. In a secure underground facility beneath the Rocky Mountains, General Marcus Anderson watched the data stream across his screens with an expression carved from stone. Behind him, 24 of Earth's highest-ranking military and civilian leaders sat in silence, their faces illuminated by the soft blue glow of holographic displays. Diplomat Reed's vital signs are stable but critical, reported Dr. Wilson, their chief medical officer. The alien medical facility on the station is treating him, though they claim our physiology is primitive. She didn't hide her contempt at the last word. Anderson nodded once, then pressed a button on his console. Initiate protocol, Diplomat. Around the room, screens flickered to life, displaying a complex web of operations that had been in place since humanity's first contact with the Star Alliance. While the aliens saw Earth as a newcomer to galactic politics, stumbling through their first steps into a larger universe, the reality was far different. All sleeper agents reporting ready, announced Colonel Hayes, his fingers dancing across his terminal. We have assets in place across 87% of critical Star Alliance infrastructure. The militant faction believes they've demonstrated their superiority, Anderson said, his voice steady. They expect us to either cower or react with obvious military force. They don't realize that we've been preparing for this possibility since before we revealed ourselves to the galactic community. In orbit, Earth's modest fleet of primitive ships maintained their regular patrols. No additional vessels were launched. No obvious military buildup began. To any watching alien eyes, it appeared that humanity was paralyzed with indecision or fear. The room's main display showed live feeds from the Grand Council station. The militant faction's representatives were already making speeches about maintaining order and the importance of respecting established hierarchies. Other species either nodded in agreement or maintained diplomatic silence. Their arrogance is remarkable, observed Director Thompson of Intelligence. They genuinely believe we're as technologically limited as we've appeared to be. The infiltration protocols have worked perfectly. Anderson turned to face the assembled leaders. For 10 years, we've hidden our true capabilities. Every ship we've shown them has been deliberately outdated. Every piece of technology we've displayed has been carefully crafted to appear less advanced than it is. While they mockingly offered to teach us basic spatial navigation, our quantum computers were mapping their entire communication network. Begin Phase 1, he ordered. Across the room, operators began sending coded transmissions to human agents embedded throughout alien space. These weren't traditional spies or soldiers, but rather unassuming maintenance workers, merchant crew members, and low-level administrative staff who had slowly been positioned in key locations over the years. What about the public response? Asked the UN Secretary-General, who was attending via secure hologram. The media will want to know how we're responding to this attack on our diplomat. We release the prepared statement, Anderson replied. Express concern, request clarification, demonstrate appropriate diplomatic caution. Let them think we're struggling to formulate a response. The more they underestimate us, the more effective our countermeasures will be. On screens around the room, the first reports began coming in. Small systems throughout Star Alliance space were already experiencing minor malfunctions. Nothing critical, nothing obvious, just enough to create tiny cracks in their confidence. They burned our diplomat, Anderson said quietly, looking at an image of Reed in the alien medical facility. Now they'll learn why Earth has survived every crisis in its history. Not because we're the strongest or the most advanced, but because we understand something they don't. True power lies in making your enemies underestimate you until it's too late. The room hummed with quiet activity as Earth's carefully planned response began to unfold. There would be no dramatic declarations of war, no obvious retaliation. Instead, the Star Alliance was about to discover that they had spent years unknowingly surrounding themselves with humanity's invisible web. Send word to our allies among the smaller species, Anderson ordered. Tell them to be ready, but take no action. When this is over, the galaxy's political landscape will look very different. He paused, allowing himself a small smile. And humanity's mask of primitive simplicity will no longer be necessary. The head engineer of Trading Station Delta 7 couldn't understand what was happening to his systems. For the third time this cycle, the automated cargo sorting machines had misrouted shipments, sending luxury goods to industrial sectors and raw materials to residential zones. His antennae twitched in frustration as he input the override codes again. "Must be a software glitch," muttered his assistant, a human worker named Jack who had been hired 2 cycles ago for basic maintenance. The engineer barely noticed as Jack quietly left the control room, his work shift complete. Similar scenes were playing out across Star Alliance space. On the central banking world of the militant faction, account managers were discovering small but persistent discrepancies in their transaction records. Security systems in high-priority military installations would mysteriously reset themselves, creating gaps in surveillance that lasted mere seconds but occurred with increasing frequency. In the Grand Council chamber, where the attack on Reed had taken place just days ago, the chief moderator was growing concerned. The chamber's environmental controls had begun behaving erratically, creating pockets of uncomfortable temperature and humidity levels that seemed to follow certain delegation members, particularly those who had supported the attack on the human diplomat. "The primitives have been unusually quiet," observed one of the militant faction leaders during an emergency meeting. Their private chambers were supposed to be secure, but unknown to them, every word was being recorded by surveillance systems that had been installed within the very walls during the station's last, routine, maintenance. "Perhaps they finally understand their place," another member replied, mandibles clicking in satisfaction. "The demonstration with their diplomat seems to have been effective." The faction leader's aide, who had served them faithfully for 3 cycles, quietly updated the message logs while keeping his expression neutral. His human handlers would find this conversation very interesting. Across the station, a maintenance worker named Maria finished her shift in the power distribution center. As she had done every day for the past 2 years, she performed her usual tasks, checked the systems, and logged her reports. Nobody noticed that the station's power grid was now operating at 98.7% efficiency instead of its usual 99.9%, a tiny difference that would compound over time. In the medical bay where Reed was recovering, Dr. Wilson had arrived from Earth to consult on his treatment. The alien medical staff dismissed her presence, assuming Earth's medical knowledge was as primitive as their other technology. They didn't realize that every piece of equipment she brought contained sophisticated scanning devices, mapping their medical technology while appearing to be simple monitoring tools. The Star Alliance's military command was beginning to receive disturbing reports. Ships were reporting navigation errors that resolved themselves before they could be properly documented. Communication relays would experience microsecond delays, not enough to disrupt operations, but enough to create a growing sense of unease. "All systems are functioning within normal parameters," declared the chief of security during an emergency briefing. Yet something feels wrong. In Earth's underground command center, General Anderson reviewed the incoming data with satisfaction. Every human agent was performing exactly as trained, making subtle adjustments that would gradually erode the Star Alliance's confidence in their own systems. "Phase 1 is proceeding as planned," reported Colonel Hayes. "Our embedded agents report no suspicion of human involvement. The Alliance continues to attribute the issues to internal malfunctions." Anderson nodded, studying the holographic display showing the spreading pattern of incidents across Alliance space. "They still see us as primitives playing at galactic politics," he said. "They don't realize that every piece of technology they've shared with us, every system they've allowed us to access, has been carefully documented and analyzed for vulnerabilities." "Sir," interrupted a junior officer, "we're receiving reports that the militant faction is planning to make another show of force. They believe Earth's lack of response indicates weakness." Anderson's expression remained neutral, but a hint of satisfaction crossed his face. "Perfect. Let them continue to believe that. The more they underestimate us, the more effective our response will be. He turned to his staff. Prepare for Phase 2. It's time to show them that their technology isn't as secure as they think it is. Throughout Alliance space, human agents continued their quiet work, each small action contributing to a carefully orchestrated plan that had been years in the making. The aliens had burned a human diplomat, never suspecting that this would be the trigger for their own unraveling. The leader of the militant faction stormed through his private chambers, rage evident in the violent clicking of his mandibles. His personal fortune, accumulated through centuries of political maneuvering, had vanished overnight. Every account, every investment, every hidden cache of resources had been mysteriously transferred away, leaving behind no trace of their destination. How is this possible? He demanded, facing his chief of security. Our banking systems are secured by quantum encryption. The security chief's scales had paled to an ashen gray. Sir, it appears the encryption was compromised. But we don't understand how. The only recent access was from our routine maintenance systems. Neither of them noticed that the maintenance logs had been updated by a human technician who had worked in their facility for the past 3 years. In another sector of Alliance space, the faction's weapons research facility was experiencing a different kind of crisis. Somehow, detailed plans for their next-generation plasma weapons had found their way to their political rivals. The facility's commander couldn't explain how the data breach had occurred, their networks showed no signs of intrusion. The humans remained suspiciously quiet, observed one of the faction's council members during an emergency meeting. Perhaps we should. He stopped mid-sentence as every screen in the room suddenly displayed classified footage of their own leadership accepting bribes from prohibited species. Back on the Grand Council station, Reed continued his recovery in the medical bay. His burns were healing well, though he maintained the appearance of being more severely injured than he actually was. From his bed, he monitored the steadily increasing stream of reports about the militant faction's misfortunes. Another unfortunate accident, he murmured, reviewing the news about a faction supply fleet that had found itself stranded in deep space after all their navigation systems simultaneously malfunctioned. The aliens had attributed it to a solar flare, never suspecting that the software update they'd received the previous week had contained a carefully crafted backdoor. In Earth's command center, General Anderson watched the chaos unfold with clinical precision. Status report, he ordered. The militant faction's command structure is beginning to fracture, reported Colonel Hayes. Their leaders are turning on each other, each suspecting the others of sabotage. 3 high-ranking officials have already fled to neutral territory. Director Thompson added, our agents report that rival factions are beginning to distance themselves from the militants. Nobody wants to be associated with a group experiencing such unfortunate accidents. Anderson nodded, studying the holographic display showing the spreading political fallout. Activate the next phase. It's time to expose their secret communication networks. Across Alliance space, the militant faction's encrypted channels began broadcasting their private messages on open frequencies. Years of conspiracy, blackmail, and illegal dealings were laid bare for all species to see. The faction's leadership watched helplessly as their carefully constructed power base crumbled. Sir, a junior officer reported to Anderson, we're detecting increased activity around the faction's military installations. They appear to be preparing for aggressive action. Let them try, Anderson replied calmly. Every weapon they possess has been quietly modified by our maintenance crews over the years. The moment they attempt to use their advanced technology against us, they'll discover just how compromised their systems really are. In the Grand Council chamber, the militant faction's representatives were conspicuously absent from the day's session. Their pods remained empty as rumors circulated about their mounting troubles. Other species began openly questioning the wisdom of having supported the attack on the human diplomat. How curious, Reed commented to his medical attendant, his voice carrying just a hint of satisfaction. It seems our friends in the militant faction are having a rather difficult time lately. One might almost think they'd attracted someone's attention. The attendant, not realizing the significance of Reed's words, simply nodded and continued their work. Meanwhile, throughout Alliance space, human agents continued their methodical dismantling of the faction's power structure, proving that humanity had learned long ago that the best revenge isn't served hot or cold, it's served invisibly. The Grand Council chamber was unusually crowded. Representatives from every member species had gathered, drawn by rumors of a special announcement from Earth. The militant faction's remaining leaders huddled in their pods, their once proud postures now hunched with tension. Admiral James Walker, Earth's new representative, stood calmly at the chamber's center. His white uniform was pristine, its simplicity a stark contrast to the ornate garments of the alien diplomats. Behind him, Thomas Reed sat in a hover chair, his burned body still showing signs of recovery. "Honorable members of the Grand Council," Walker began, his voice carrying clearly through the chamber. "Earth has maintained silence following the attack on our diplomat. Many interpreted this as weakness. Today, we will clarify that misconception." The chamber's main display activated, showing a real-time map of Alliance space. Thousands of points of light began blinking into existence, each representing a human agent or compromised system. "For the past decade," Walker continued, "while you viewed us as primitives, we were learning. Every piece of technology you mockingly shared, every system you allowed us to access, every facility you let us maintain, all of it was studied, documented, and quietly modified." Gasps and murmurs filled the chamber as the display zoomed in on various locations. Security footage showed human maintenance workers, administrative assistants, and service personnel going about their daily tasks in critical facilities across Alliance space. The recent difficulties experienced by certain factions were not accidents, Walker stated, his gaze fixing on the militant faction's pods. "They were a demonstration. A small sample of our capabilities." The chief moderator's crystalline form flickered with agitation. "Are you claiming responsibility for the attacks on Alliance infrastructure?" "Attacks?" Walker raised an eyebrow. "No attacks occurred. We simply revealed vulnerabilities that already existed. Vulnerabilities that we identified years ago but chose not to exploit, until our diplomat was burned." The display shifted to show detailed schematics of Alliance military vessels, banking systems, and communication networks. Each diagram highlighted critical weaknesses that human agents had discovered and documented. Thomas Reed, Walker gestured to the burned diplomat, wasn't just a representative. He was the architect of our infiltration protocol. Every human worker in Alliance space was personally vetted and positioned according to his strategy. Reed managed a small wave from his hover chair, noting the shocked expressions of those who had dismissed him as a primitive diplomat. "Earth could have crippled the Alliance's infrastructure at any time," Walker continued. "We could have drained your banks, disabled your ships, or exposed every secret communication. Instead, we chose cooperation and peace, until that choice was answered with plasma burns." The chamber erupted in chaos as species began realizing the full implications. The humans they had mocked as primitives had actually been several steps ahead the entire time. "We now stand at a crossroads," Walker's voice cut through the noise. "Earth remains committed to peaceful cooperation, but we will no longer maintain the facade of technological inferiority. The attack on our diplomat has demonstrated that such pretense is no longer productive." He pressed a button on his console, and the display showed Earth's true technological capabilities, quantum computing far beyond Alliance standards, stealth systems that could hide entire fleets, and energy weapons that made plasma burns look primitive in comparison. "We didn't develop these technologies recently," Walker explained. "We had them before first contact. We simply chose not to reveal them, preferring to observe how advanced species would treat those they considered primitive." The chamber fell silent as the implications sank in. Earth hadn't been struggling to catch up with Alliance technology, they had been studying how the Alliance would treat a seemingly weaker species. Consider this a lesson in humility, Walker concluded. Earth extends its hand in friendship, as we always have. But now we do so without pretense. The choice of how to proceed belongs to the Alliance. As Walker finished speaking, the display showed one final image, Earth's actual defense fleet emerging from stealth, their advanced ships surrounding every major Alliance installation. They had been there all along, invisible guardians waiting for a moment that Earth had hoped would never come. The days following Admiral Walker's revelation brought unprecedented changes to the galactic political landscape. The Grand Council chamber, once a place where humans were relegated to the lowest tiers, had become a theater of frantic diplomatic maneuvering. The militant factions' remaining leaders huddled in their private chambers, now stripped of most of their political influence. Their private communications, laid bare for all to see, had revealed centuries of manipulation and corruption. Former allies distanced themselves with almost comic speed, leaving the once powerful faction isolated and vulnerable. "The humans must have been laughing at us the entire time," muttered one of the faction's leaders, mandibles clicking nervously as they reviewed reports of their crumbling empire. "All those years we thought we were teaching primitives, they were actually testing us." In the council's main reception hall, a small crowd had gathered around a human maintenance worker who was finishing his shift. The alien diplomats watched with new eyes as he completed his tasks, wondering how many other seemingly humble humans were actually highly trained operatives. Reed, still in his hover chair but recovering steadily, observed the changed atmosphere with quiet satisfaction. Alien representatives who had once sneered at him now approached with careful respect, some even offering formal apologies for their previous behavior. "It must have been difficult," a representative from one of the smaller species said to him, "maintaining that facade for so long, enduring our condescension while possessing such power." Reed smiled diplomatically. Earth understood that true strength isn't about domination. We wanted to learn how the Alliance would treat those they considered inferior. It was educational. In orbit around major Alliance worlds, Earth's advanced fleet remained visible, their presence a constant reminder of humanity's hidden capabilities. The ship's designs revealed technology that seamlessly blended multiple scientific disciplines, demonstrating an understanding of physics that many Alliance species had thought impossible. "Their stealth systems alone are beyond our comprehension," admitted the Alliance's chief of military technology during an emergency session. "They could have had entire armadas following our ships for years, and we would never have known." The political reshuffling was swift and dramatic. Species that had previously aligned themselves with the militant faction now sought separate treaties with Earth. Trade agreements were hastily revised, with human technical expertise suddenly in high demand. In Earth's command center, General Anderson reviewed the latest diplomatic communications with his staff. "Every major power in the Alliance is trying to establish exclusive relations with us," he noted. "They've finally realized that we've been holding back far more than just military technology. The smaller species are particularly interested," Colonel Hayes added. "They see us as proof that perceived technological status doesn't define a species' true capabilities." The most dramatic changes were happening within the Alliance's scientific community. Research facilities that had once dismissed human theories as primitive were now desperately analyzing Earth's technological demonstrations, realizing that humanity's apparent technological gap had been a carefully crafted illusion. "Their understanding of quantum mechanics alone," one alien scientist reported, their tentacles waving in excitement, "suggests they solved problems centuries ago that we're still struggling with. And they chose not to share this knowledge until now." Admiral Walker, now a regular presence in the highest levels of Alliance governance, maintained Earth's new diplomatic stance with careful precision. "We remain committed to peaceful cooperation," he reminded the Council during a crucial session. "Earth has no desire for dominion or revenge. We simply expect to be treated as equals, something we had hoped would be possible without this demonstration." The message was clear: humanity had possessed the power to dominate the Alliance all along but had chosen cooperation instead. The attack on their diplomat hadn't revealed Earth's weakness, it had simply removed their reason to maintain the pretense of being less advanced than they were. As the galactic political structure continued its rapid transformation, one truth became increasingly clear to all species: they had never been dealing with primitives learning to take their first steps into a larger galaxy. They had been dealing with masters of strategy who had chosen to appear harmless until given reason to do otherwise. One standard galactic month after Earth's revelation, Thomas Reed stood unassisted at the window of his private quarters on the Grand Council station. His burns had healed well, leaving only faint scars that Earth's advanced medical technology could have removed, but he had chosen to keep them as a reminder. The station's layout had been reorganized, with Earth's delegation now occupying one of the premier diplomatic suites. Below his window, he could see ships from dozens of species docking and departing, their traffic patterns reflecting the new political reality. Human vessels no longer hid their advanced capabilities, their sleek designs and sophisticated technology on full display. A soft chime announced a visitor. Reed turned to find Admiral Walker entering with a data pad. "The former leader of the militant faction has requested an audience," Walker reported. "He's waiting in the diplomatic reception area." Reed nodded, straightening his uniform. Time to close this chapter properly. The reception area was quiet when Reed entered. The once proud alien leader who had ordered the plasma attack sat alone, his mandibles still and his posture subdued. His ceremonial armor had been replaced with simple civilian attire, marking his fall from power. "I didn't expect you to agree to meet me," the former leader said, his translator conveying a tone of resignation. Reed took a seat across from him. "Earth's policy has always been one of dialogue, even with those who chose violence. We thought we were teaching primitives their place," the alien admitted. "Instead, we were students failing a test we didn't know we were taking." He paused, mandibles clicking softly. "The human workers in my compound, my personal aide for 3 cycles. All highly trained operatives," Reed confirmed. "Every one of them provided regular reports on your activities, your technologies, your vulnerabilities. Not for exploitation, but as insurance, in case diplomacy failed." In orbit above them, Earth's advanced fleet maintained their visible presence. But now they were joined by ships from various Alliance species, conducting joint training exercises. The humans were finally sharing their true technological knowledge, but only with those who had proven themselves worthy partners. "Our xenopsychologists studied your species extensively," Reed continued. "We knew that simply revealing our advanced technology would lead to fear and possibly conflict. So we chose to appear harmless, to let you believe you were the teachers. We wanted to see how you would treat a species you thought was weaker than you." The former leader's scales paled. "And we failed that test spectacularly." "Not all of you," Reed corrected. "Many species treated us with respect despite believing we were technologically inferior. They're now our closest allies. The militant faction, however." He gestured to the alien civilian clothes, letting the consequence speak for itself. A group of human and alien children passed by the reception area, part of a new cultural exchange program. They were laughing together, sharing stories and experiences without any hint of superiority or condescension. "That," Reed said, pointing to the children, "is what we wanted from the beginning. True cooperation. Equal exchange of ideas. Species learning from each other without prejudice or pride. And all it took was burning a human diplomat to show us the way," the former leader said bitterly. Reed stood, his scars visible in the station's artificial light. "It didn't have to be this way. Earth would have gladly maintained our facade of technological simplicity indefinitely if it meant peaceful cooperation. Your attack didn't reveal our strength, it simply removed our reason to hide it." As Reed left the reception area, he passed more signs of the changing order. Alliance scientists eagerly collaborated with human experts, learning that Earth's apparent technological gap had been carefully crafted misdirection. Trade ships carried advanced human technology to worlds that had proven themselves worthy partners. The galactic community was transforming into something closer to what humanity had hoped for from the beginning. In his private quarters later, Reed recorded his final diplomatic log. The lesson has been learned. The galaxy now understands that true civilization isn't measured by technological advancement, but by how you treat those you believe to be less advanced than yourself. Earth's mask of primitiveness served its purpose, revealing the true nature of our potential allies and enemies alike. The burns I suffered were a small price to pay for this understanding. He looked out at the stars, where human and alien ships now flew together as equals. Sometimes, he mused, the most powerful species isn't the one that shows its strength, but the one wise enough to hide it until absolutely necessary.